Welcome back everyone. Today we've got to talk about another in-battle developer. In this case, it's Creative Assembly, where they're really in the middle of a trying time. Basically, right, they've spent the last year or so just being battered and bruised by multiple really messy launches, especially stuff with Warhammer, but also Total War Pharaoh. Some of that's of course totally fair, audiences maybe not liking design decisions, but Creative Assembly's big picture decision making was particularly under fire. There was quite a lot of leaks, and also the pressure of Sega and the death of Hyenas. So very much with their name really battered, they're now trying to do what they can, and that means making sure existing people are happy. So rather than abandoning Total War Pharaoh, they're actually doing quite a lot of changes, and rather insanely, they're doing a bunch of them for free. They're also making sure that the ongoing support for Warhammer 3 is solid, and also that expectations are managed well. They're very much off the back of a very strong release with Thrones of Decay, but, well, you've had one good release, people will want multiple so that they see a positive pattern, and all of the reasons that led to Shadows of Change having a whole bunch of problems, well, have those fundamental things actually changed? Are there still problems at the company? And of course, it's a company that can't just whip out a Medieval 3, even though that's what we all want, because that's probably a very, very, very long way off. And then going by a bunch of leaks, the next 3 games for the team may not even be that historical or fantastical at all. Just a quick little note before we continue with the video, another thing has happened in the community and it's absolutely fascinating. Essentially, an ex-Creative Assembly staffer called Julian, he worked on AI, especially on Rome 2 Total War, and he's released this humongous article on his Medium page. It is a really incredible read. So I'd recommend you check it out. It does make for fantastic reading. If you were deeply interested in Total War around that period of time, as I was, if you have interesting memories regarding the Siege of Carthage gameplay demos, trailer thing that they did, I recommend you check it out. And of course, within his experience, there are loads of problems that do appear to have tracked forward through time and really led to the degradation of the Total War brand. Now, I'm probably going to dive into that document a bit more deeply in a few days. The reason why is this is already a real chunky video, and on the 26th, the DLC announcements will be dropping. Perhaps there'll be other news, so we'll talk about it properly then, but just to say that's happened, it's worth you knowing about it. So today's job then is the state of Total War, the state of Creative Assembly, and just what the hell is going on, if they can win their players back and then keep them. And of course, if you want to help us keep going, here's today's sponsor. Us, specifically at Bellular.Games, where we publish Loading Screen daily for our members. Now, Loading Screen is on our site. It also is in your inbox as a newsletter. And on Loading Screen, we cover games as they're coming out and loads of breaking stories, as well as things that we're not able to cover here on the main channel with videos. It's only be getting better and better as time goes on. I think it's a fantastic daily read to throw into your rotation, perhaps if you're taking the bus, reading over breakfast, that kind of thing. So if you want to give us a shot, you can consider a free trial over at Bellular.Games and get Loading Screen. It's the single best way that you can actually support what we do. So a big thank you to everyone who is chipping in over there right now. With that said, let's get into the news. First up, Warhammer 3, where they did their entire E3 press conference in a single tweet. Yeah, they just said, Khorne, Ogre Kingdom's Green Skins 2024. Thanks for attending our presser. More info June 26th, which of course is not too long away. That's it, that's the tweet, and it's part a cheeky tease, but it's also part rebuke, because there was a whole bunch of leaking going on, especially, or I think most notably, the Legend of Total War video. Now, this is where it gets really, really fascinating. So in one of the recent videos, he talked about upcoming Warhammer 3 DLC. Now, it's actually a really, really well-handled video. He heavily caveated everything in terms of believability. He put it into full context, and he basically said, here's some reasons you should believe, and maybe some reasons you shouldn't believe. Overall, though, this is stuff that he said he had heard from multiple people, and he was able to corroborate stuff. Now, I do not think in any way that he was lying. So his information was 3 further DLC packs coming to Warhammer 3. The first leak was the expansion of Cathay, where the core DLC would see Cathay seemingly get 2 new sub-factions featuring an Ogre and Tigerman Lord of Peace, which, yeah, I mean, to me, honestly, big Tiger Man, that does seem kind of cool. And that would then be paired with Goldfag Maneater being basically free LC. Now, Cathay does make a lot of sense for narrative expansion, and that's because Creative Assembly did a lot of development work alongside Game Workshop staff. So that basically means there's quite a bit of room to maneuver in terms of like making new, new creations rather than just reproducing existing lore. So there was that. The next DLC then was seemingly to be a Dogs of War one, which yes, would be the Tillian Mercenary. So mixed armies pulled right from that army list from actual Warhammer Fantasy Battle, which would be pretty cool. Finally, there was to be a Monkey King DLC with 21 items of of content that would basically be another sub-faction for Cathay. And this is the one that Legend thought, at least from his perspective, was the most susceptible to perhaps cancellation or production changes based on how far away it would be. So to bring it together then, this would have been 2 faction expansions that allowed the team at CA to create something new in the form of Cathay, and then basically doing like Dogs of War and Tigermen basically as really deep pulls from the history of the tabletop game. To some people, that's cool. To some people, though, a little bit confusing. Now, what's interesting is when we take a look at what they said in Twitter, because only one of these leaked items is turning up, right? Only one of them was on that tweet. Now, we don't actually know what shape the updates from the tweet are actually going to take. So then, we have a little bit of overlap, but also a lot of stuff that doesn't overlap. Does that mean that Legend was lying? The answer is, of course, it does not mean that he was lying. He clearly talked about this information being stuff that he had verified, but that it represents information that was passed to him from staff at a specific time. That's the thing to always remember with leaks. Leaks represent what one person understands, of course, within a pretty damn big organization at one point in time, and what somebody may know, let's say if they're maybe community manager, maybe they work in like publishing or QA, well, they might have just completely out-of-date information. Still, though, it is a fairly bizarre situation, especially because it almost seemed timely that they did that tweet right after a set of leaks. A set of leaks that some people in the community, Legend included, felt could be a little bit concerning. So part of his motivation, right, was he thought that a lot of this is focusing on Cathay, and that may be a bad idea for the current Total War audience, and he would much rather see resources spent on changes and fixes that would be directly addressing feedback from players on existing factions, right? Of course, if it's solving a problem with an existing faction, that basically means that the value proposition of the DLC is immediately understandable to the audience. That's totally fair, and looking at what Creative Assembly said, it almost seems that they do agree with him. So maybe Cathay stuff was cancelled in the past, right? Maybe that was a plan and they've since changed it. But we don't really know. What I can say, though, is that tweet says 2024, right? It marks those as 2024 bits of content. So will we get like 3 more DLCs within 2024? Legend was saying he was expecting about 3 DLCs, maybe 4, and some of that would be performance dependent. So maybe we have a case where quite a lot of what was leaked was actually a plan at one stage in time, but we've basically since seen that morph. Some of the further away, like longer range stuff within the Legend leaks, maybe some of that could happen in 2025. And yeah, that would probably be quite a bit of support, but I think it's no shock that the Warhammer audience is one that Creative Assembly absolutely wants to keep. In our prior analysis of this series, one of the most notable things, right, is how many people are playing Medieval 2? And maybe to a lesser degree, like Rome or Empire or something, but really, like Medieval. Oh boy, people love Medieval. There are so many mods and things like that for Medieval, and that presents a problem for CA because guess what? If you've got like 10,000 people playing Medieval, you're not really going to be earning that much money. It's an old game, it's a cheap game, it doesn't have loads of DLC. What you want is people playing, ideally, this game. Maybe playing, say, Rome Emperor Edition or whatever it's called, that does actually have some DLC support. Problem basically is they are significantly being outcompeted by some of their older offerings. So this is their one newer offering that is actually, I don't want to say stable, because it has been very rocky, but it is one that does show it can actually produce some numbers. So them keeping that support on really does matter, especially because of what it could dovetail in terms of a new Total War game, maybe with 40k, which has obviously been rumored for years. I am forced to think, though, and especially in light with what's going on with Pharaoh, that perhaps some of CA has realized they cannot keep on getting away with their typical bullshit. Now, for me, I want radically better, AI, I will have a lot of things to say about unit cohesion, and I probably will be quite a grumpy boomer insofar as like the Creative Assembly game audience goes. So if we're to see what they announce for 2024 happening, and then some version of some of the things that Legend talked about maybe happening into 25, I think that would mesh broadly with the idea of maybe a 40k not coming out immediately, maybe them having like perhaps a year longer. Because if you take a look at Warhammer 3, one thing is abundantly clear. Warhammer 3 was undercooked, and it was undercooked on just about every level. Of course, we have had many leaks. I actually had people leaking to me about some of the internal development of the Realms of Chaos campaign. Of course, the Realms of Chaos campaign, honestly, is kind of wank. Really, yeah, not great. The thing people actually care about, of course, is Immortal Empires. So, That basically needed way more gameplay iteration. People were trying to sound the alarm internally, and allegedly anyway, that wasn't really listened to. It also had a whole bunch of bugs, design oversights, and that sort of thing. It was a really rough launch, which is sad because Warhammer 2 had been doing pretty damn terrifically. So Warhammer 3 damaged the game quite a bit, and it seems it's really taken them a long time to actually stabilize. Maybe they know that if they do a 40k, and they cock it up like they did with Warhammer 3, that basically that would be true lasting damage. So perhaps more time for them to do some DLCs, maybe a few cheaper ones that are mostly focused on reworking existing factions rather than adding in masses of, new units and that sort of thing. Maybe they can balance these things, keep the players happy, and have enough time to actually make the next proper big game good. Now, I admit some of that is a bit of a theory. It's one that I think does make sense given the financial incentives, because basically, you've done as much managed decline as you can. There is no more austerity to do. Warhammer was dying. Perhaps they've hit rock bottom and realized. So with that in mind, let's talk about Pharaoh. Now, Pharaoh is an odd one because there absolutely is a financial case to getting Warhammer 3 in a good place. Like, you're selling DLC, you've got very active player numbers, and loads of players did come back for Thrones of Decay. In a recent video, we went through those numbers. It's pretty impressive. Pharaoh, though, has never really been pulling in the numbers, so this is not going to be like the Ingoodening of No Man's Sky, but they clearly are doing what they can here. And the latest thing with Pharaoh has been a lot of details from the team at Sophia. We're having a map expansion for the game. It adds in Greece and Mesopotamia, and they've recently shown off just how much this changes. So here's a look at the new map, and to be honest with you, that's really exciting. It's really exciting to me because this is a period of history that I just find to be pretty damn awesome. Yeah, I don't know. I love the Bronze Age sort of collapse era. A channel you may enjoy, by the way, is Fall of Civilizations. A few very long-form videos that I think you would enjoy there. Maybe a good companion to when you're playing a game like this. So, a big expansion of the map. It's almost doubled, and there are way more factions and way more settlements. Basically, it's turned this from a far smaller game, basically a Saga title, not to a full Total War title, but it's definitely Saga++ when you're dealing with a map of this size. Thing is, though, if you're thinking about Bronze Age Greece and you've remembered Total War Troy, you'll probably see quite a lot of similarities. Because yes, loads of things here are actually from Troy, and that makes a lot of sense because Pharaoh basically seems to be a fork of Troy. As an example, they've added 25 new minor cultures for players. Each have got their own strengths and weaknesses, and they explicitly do contain characters and units from Troy, like Achilles, Odysseus, and Ajax, and the like. So the idea that they're going to be, hanging out with Ramses, that's a bit odd. But I appreciate that there's way more content. And in terms of the reuse, some of these are having models translated over from Troy. The team, though, are clarifying that it's not a copy and paste. Now, immediately as a player, I'm going to immediately press X to doubt. That being said, they do actually make sense when they explain things. Basically, they said that this is not just a case of stitching it on. There's a lot of technical stuff in the implementation there, but I think most importantly what they highlight is systems. So one example of that is the faction mechanics from Troy are completely untranslatable to Pharaoh. They're different games, different economies, different systems. So yes, you will have matched factions between the games, but in Pharaoh, they're going to have completely different playstyles. And then they've also said that they'll be doing entirely new optional mechanics designed to make Pharaoh feel different to other games in the franchise. And one of those is an interesting one to me. It is the potential for a single blow to kill. Right? To actually kill a model in one hit. It's basically, I suppose, like a lethality. Like an amazing critical strike that just is a kill. But the way that it will work is, say, a club will have a high rate of hitting, but a low rate of an instant killing blow. Whereas an axe maybe won't hit as often, but has a higher chance to just get that one, that big one-hit kill. So that does sound interesting to me. What I'd really love to see, though, is before and afters, just getting units to attack each other. I know there's a bunch of YouTubers who do content like that, so it'll be interesting to see what this actually just means for the combat system of Total War. So that's kind of interesting. The last part then is aided by 60 new battle maps being added for Mesopotamia. Yes, 60 battle maps. They're pretty big. They're upgraded to a 6x6 tile range compared to the base game's 4x4, and they've also reworked some returning maps and cities from Troy. So it's a lot of content basically being brought together into one game. And obviously we need to wait and see how this actually shakes out, but this is a free update for a game that, I purchased for review because obviously we were all pretty suspicious about it, but they reduced the price, they refunded me the difference, and now, instead of cutting and running with that game, which I think a lot of people would have expected given its absolutely abysmal sales, they are actually committing work time to putting things in the game. So while I don't know if this suddenly means Pharaoh is going to be a Total War game that I play a whole bunch, at least as a disgruntled customer who definitely has some long-term bones to pick, I've been grumpy with Creative Assembly on and off since Rome 2. If you were there around Rome 2 launch, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But I do actually feel like they've tried to make things right with me here as a customer, so that is very much appreciated. And there's one thing I want to call out. This is obviously not like scientific polling and an amazing sample of the audience, but it is a sample of the very engaged Total War audience, mostly with a bent towards Warhammer 3. So when this was initially announced, and there have been way more updates since, including a lot of changes to the battle system, so I'd be interested to see what would happen if he did this poll again. But Legend ran a poll, so we see 64% saying they're not interested in Pharaoh, 28% saying I am interested only after this update, 5% always interested, 1% I bought Pharaoh and didn't like it, this won't bring me back, and then a final poll category probably to like eat up the junk, the junk votes that could be put in there. So a fairly interesting thing. I mean, yes, the 64 will definitely feel sad, but 28% of that audience, I think that's kind of strong, especially considering his audience will not be skewed towards Pharaoh, given that he mostly covers Warhammer Doomstacks and, disaster campaigns and all of that sort of content. Where this gets fun, though, is going into the numbers. So let's take a look at reviews for Warhammer 3. Obviously, they are still mixed overall, and I would say rightly so, given the history with this game. You can see a large negative spike at the start, but, right, and it's not quite as large, but proportionally it's far more negative. You can see when the whole Shadows of Change thing went on. But if you look a little bit more recently, you do actually see way, way, way more positive reviews. In fact, very positive reviews per Steam. Then when you take a look at Pharaoh, well, what's actually happened is reviews overall have dried out, but when you look at the recent ones, you do see more positive than negative. That's important for Pharaoh, given that the big new content isn't out already. Overall, what we see, though, is while the Pharaoh audience is tiny, they are getting happier, they are getting more content and stuff for free. They're trying to make it right there. And as for Thrones of Decay, well, what I know is I've been doing a lot of gunpowder bullshit. That's been pretty fun, and I didn't have to buy the entire DLC. I just bought one part of it, the part that I was actually interested in. So that does feel pretty reasonable. With that being said, right, and with them clearly trying to shore up their more dedicated audience, let's see what their future asks are going to be and talk about leaks. Okay, the future of Total War. So we've had some idea with this. Legend had sources detailing that there would be a Warhammer 40k set game and a World War I set game. Both of those are things I would be very, very interested in, but it is a stance that he has updated. The World War I game apparently is on hiatus after suffering development hell. Now, obviously, we don't know why, but when I think about how loads of the mechanics work in Total War, sometimes just the annoyance of moving units on a wall. I could certainly imagine unit control around trenches and that sort of thing being really, really hard to do when you're dealing with that setting. Things like, crater holes and just real big levels of detail, those matter. Right? They matter a lot. Now, obviously, it's not like some Man of War or Company of Heroes like situation, but still, you would have to have some degree of simulating that. Mods have obviously not really been able to do that, even though they have took really good stabs at World War I, so I can understand why that would go into development hell. The next, though, is he said we should start hearing about Warhammer 40k within the next 12 months. To me, of course, that's extremely exciting. 40k is awesome, and when you look at the unit sizes that they're used to playing with in the fantasy Warhammer setting, well, I think 40k could actually map on surprisingly well. Next, then, something truly bizarre that has emerged with Jewel Shockers doing reporting is that the third game is going to be Star Wars themed, which is crazy. Now, Legend has actually agreed with that, but he said it's so far into the future that any sort of detailed leaks are almost pointless. Of course, the more confirmation, the merrier. We also had Andy Robinson of Video Games Chronicle speak up about this issue as well. So, 3 potential Total War games, seemingly the First World War I being cancelled or just indefinitely, basically seemingly screwed. But what you can see, right, is like a parallel with all of these is movement, actually. It's movement in shooting, right? Between Star Wars, First World War, Warhammer 40k. You'll be having movement without rank and file infantry, missile weapons as your primary means of engagement, melee being a secondary, and more of a focus on big war machines. It all does kind of make sense, but it does represent, well, it represents changes from the sorts of Total Wars that they've done. And thinking about Star Wars, World War I, Warhammer 40k, in my opinion, the one that's hardest to get right is actually the First World War, because you have to engage in such a deep level of granularity to do the First World War right. Whereas with 40k, because it's a little bit more fantasy, because it's so much, well, just so larger than life, you maybe don't have to deal with things being as granular as a player would expect with the First World War, and I think similar stuff holds for Star Wars. And like the nerd side of me just looks at this and thinks, oh my god, a Titan that's vaguely the scale of a Titan in a playable Total War game, that would be very cool. Now, of course, I would say, and Rob of Remap Radio would also say, that there is a lot of stuff here from the Napoleon game that, you know, you could basically see being a bit of an origin point, or, you know, that they sort of have experience. Now, that being said, with Napoleon, I mean, yeah, that era of warfare was very much blocks of troops, you know, in line with their very, very large formations. You do have some other things, though, like, say, the rifles. So, hey, any Sharp fans out there? But even in Napoleon, I never felt like I could have the granularity controlling my rifles as I actually would have wanted, or as would have maybe fit the era. So I still do think there's just more deep, like, tactical stuff that they'd really struggle with in a Total War game with the First World War. Still, though, Legend didn't say cancelled, he said hiatus. That does mean there could be hope for the World War I project. Maybe they will learn things doing the other ones that could be mapped on there. And I think you can actually see the First World War performing pretty well as a setting. It does map onto Total War fairly well, and by the time that you're moving on to the Second World War, really that's becoming less and less of a Total War style game on the actual battle map level. So without massively changing things, the First World War does seem as far as they can go. And you may say, well, that's hilarious considering they're doing Star Wars and they're doing 40k. But when you think about, say, the Astra Militarum, as we now have to call them, the Imperial Guards, I mean, they very much feel like the First World War. And I think culturally, a lot of the grimdark, because the First World War was extremely grim and felt very pointless, well, that actually does sort of carry into 40k. They're oddly well aligned. Of course, for me, there is one big missing thing. That's Medieval 3. Where is Medieval 3? I think that would do pretty bloody well, and since Medieval 2 happened, I do think that those settings have performed very well in, like, broad media. The thing with the Medieval 3, though, is when you're doing that to a modern level of scale, it starts to become very, 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 very expensive. Because funny enough, making things for Medieval 2, when units look like Medieval 2 units, that's a lot easier than tackling it with a Medieval 3. That said, if I was to play a Medieval 3, and if the sieges played any, like, you know, modern Total War sieges, I would probably just want to go back to Medieval 2 anyway. We kind of did peak back then, didn't we? Anyway, that's it for Total War. I know this has been a bit of a lengthy deep dive. Look, it's a series that I'm pretty passionate about. I've been playing this series since I was like a younger teenager, so it very much matters to me, and it's a situation where basically no one else does these games. The stuff with CA is absolutely not perfect, but there are very few games that offer legitimate like-for-like competition to the Total War series. Let us hope that more of those games do emerge, and there are some promising contenders, as we've talked about in the past. But till then, I'd like to see a reformed Creative Assembly that performs better and makes us all a lot more happy. So, let me know what you think about this. If you have got any spicy leaks, do let me know what those are. That's it for the video. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you tomorrow.